data as a product, data also as a guide for the strategies for our companies, and I'm excited about the speakers for our upcoming session. We're going to be hearing from the consumer side. We kicked off things with the consumer side this morning with the New York Times. When you talk about data, I think that's one of the few areas where B2B is actually ahead, at least when you're talking about audience data from the consumer side, identifying who people are, what they want, and how to serve them. Mashable is certainly an exception to that on the consumer side. They've undergone a dramatic focus on data, using data to really plot out their content strategy and their business strategy, and we're going to hear a little bit more about that today. Please give a round of applause for Adam Ostrow, the Chief Strategy Officer with Mashable, and his interviewer, Sarah Sluis, Senior Editor with AdExchanger. Welcome, guys.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Sluis, the Senior Editor at AdExchanger, where I write about how publishers like Mashable are using data and platforms to grow their businesses. And Adam has been with Mashable for at least 5 years, so he was there at the beginning when Mashable first started its data journey. It's built proprietary technology that helps it predict what content it should write, how to optimize that content, and how to distribute it. So to start, let's kind of get behind your thought process when you first launched this data product. What problem were you trying to solve?
Yeah, so Mashable, for those of you that don't know the whole story, we started back in 2005. I was our editor-in-chief in the early days. And initially the way we kind of figured out what we wanted to put on the site was a very data-driven process. So we were one of the first publications to really focus on social media, mobile, etc. In its infancy, and really the way we decided to cover those topics every day was really our own intuition. It was looking out and seeing across the social web, which at the time was sites like Dig and Twitter, Reddit, etc., and figure out what they were talking about, and every day kind of be taking a look at what worked the previous day and kind of learning from that and then deciding what to cover to grow our audience. And one of the things that Mashable also did, and I think one of the reasons for our success, is we were one of the first publishers to really embrace social media as a distribution platform for content. So really one of the first brands on Twitter. When Facebook opened up to brands, one of the first media companies there. So we were constantly paying attention to what was resonating with our social audience. At a time, I think a lot of other folks were focused on either search or not even ignoring digital altogether. So the challenge with that is it only scales so far, right? It was a system that was very much driven by human intuition. So around 2011, we started to think about, okay, and both myself and the founder of the company, Pete Cashmore, are technologists kind of at heart, so we started thinking about how do we apply technology to this challenge of scaling a media business. So what we started to build 5 or 6 years ago at this point was a platform we call Velocity, the early version of which was designed to essentially take the thousands of sources that we were looking at and our other editors and reporters were looking at on a daily basis and see if we could apply predictive modeling, predictive analytics. So we could go out and crawl the social web, not dissimilar to how a search engine crawls the web, and very quickly make predictions about different stories and topics. So it could tell you that this story or this topic currently has 500 social shares across the web, but in 8 hours' time, it's going to have 50,000. So that's a topic that may be of interest to our editors and reporters to cover on the site. That was the first iteration on that, and that worked extremely well for us as a tool for our reporters in identifying content. And since then, and we can get into this, we've applied that to thinking about how we distribute content and also how we optimize it while we're creating it.
Mm-hmm. And when you built that technology, was there a moment where you're like, this is working, this story would not have happened if we didn't have this technology?
Yeah, I think the very first time we saw it was working was when it was still in its infancy, still really in testing. It wasn't something we had exposed to all of our editors yet. It's actually kind of a funny story. It was So Velocity, the alpha version, call it, was telling us that the next big thing on the internet was going to be the Facebook page for the Walmart location in Kodiak, Alaska, which made zero sense at the time. We didn't think that could possibly be a correct assumption, and kind of moved on from it. But then about 24 hours later, our editorial team, independently of Velocity because they weren't using it yet, broke the story that essentially online communities like 4chan and Reddit had essentially pranked Walmart, because Walmart was having a contest where they were going to send the hip-hop artist Pitbull to the Walmart location that got the most likes on Facebook. So I think the internet thought it would be funny if Pitbull had to go all the way to Kodiak, Alaska as part of this contest. So Velocity, at that point, we realized it was kind of helping us discover things we probably wouldn't discover on our own, at least not in a timely fashion. So we really saw that as this can give us a big advantage, at least when it comes to timeliness of identifying potential content for our site.
Did he go to Alaska?
He did. There's a great picture of it, actually.
Cool. You guys covered that too,
yeah.
I take it. Yeah. Okay. And then I know in the years since you built out the platform further, when you were looking to expand, how did you know which direction to go next?
Yeah, I think so. So the early version of Velocity, obviously was incredibly helpful to our editors and reporters in identifying content. But we really wanted to, and we were seeing the results of that, both in terms of our audience growth, social engagement, et cetera. But we really wanted to start to think about how do we apply it across everything we do, across the business. So there's been several iterations. One was we really wanted to marry it with the content management system. So in the early days of Mashable, like a lot of sites, we were based on WordPress, open source blogging platform. And a few years ago started to develop our own CMS and wanted to see how could we integrate data closer to the CMS to, one, surface more insights for our editors, do things like headline optimization, or while you're writing a story, actually tell you, like in real time, what's the competition out there, how might you want to shape your story differently. Requires you to input 3 headlines so we can test which ones are getting the most traction on social media. It's also, I think, the organizational challenge of, as much as a tech-forward organization that Mashable is, it is challenging to get everybody on board with using new data tools. I think, folks they have their way they like to do things, they have their tools they use, and before, Velocity existed kind of as another, even though it was a product that we developed, existed as yet another tab on your browser. So we thought we could really drive increased usage by bringing it into the place where our editors and reporters spend so much of their time, which is in the content management and creation system. And the third piece that we focused on is distribution. So for Mashable especially, so much of our distribution is on the social web. More than half of our audience every month discovers our content via links they're finding on Facebook or Twitter or other social networks. So we really wanted to optimize for that. So we started to map not just how well our content was performing according to our own proprietary metrics, but also took a look at, can we identify who are the power users within the Mashable community? Who are the folks that when they share content tend to drive other people to either consume Mashable or also share that content? And taking it a step further, can we identify within specific topic areas of Mashable who are the influencers and the influenceable in different topics, whether it's entertainment, tech, science, etc.
Yeah, and I think the power users bit is very interesting to this B2B audience. When you started bringing that in, what kind of impact did that have? Were you able to measure just that part of it?
Yeah, the power users piece is really interesting. So this is a technology we call Kilogram. It's the newest part of what we do. It's been incredibly helpful in our branded content business. So Mashable was, I think, an early adopter of branded content is the core of our business model. It drives the majority of our revenue at Mashable. But I think, like a lot of other publishers, are seeing the demands from advertisers in terms of distribution get higher and higher in terms of what they're expecting to see. I think branded content's no longer like the experiential bucket. They want to see guarantees in terms of how many, whatever the metric is, views, shares, video views, etc. So as those demands have gotten higher, being able to target power users has been really effective for us when it comes to increasing efficiency of our marketing budget. I'll give you an example. So with an insurance company recently, big campaign. We were creating a series of articles and needed to generate a significant amount of volume on that. So what we were able to do is, and the theme of the campaign was around inspiration. So we created inspiration-focused content, kind of focused on like kid innovators, so 8 to 12-year-old scientists, children like doing amazing things. So content that tends to resonate on the social web. But what we were able to do through our Kilogram tech is identify the power users within the Mashable community around those topics, and then target them across social using paid promotion. And what we found on Facebook specifically is an 82% increase in efficiency versus what you get with just generic spend on Facebook. So we're seeing that efficiency in our branded content business, which is really great for margins, obviously.
Got it. Yeah, really fascinating. And Mashable also shares some of this data with readers, which I think is kind of cool. There's a little graph next to each article that lets you know what's trending. I think you guys might give notifications if something's about to, pop or something. So what role have you seen that play in terms of forming this Mashable community and driving engagement?
Yeah, I think from the early days, we've known that our audience is an audience that likes to share. They're an audience that likes to be first. They like to be the one that's like the first person to share like the latest technology with their friends or the latest viral video. So what we did once we created Velocity is start to organize our distribution around it. So for instance, the Mashable homepage is organized in such a way that the most visible stories are the ones that are highest velocity. So our audience, especially the audience that likes to share, can say, oh, this is something that's going to be big. I can be the first person to share it with my community. So that's how we organize the site. We also organize our distribution using it. So when we're figuring out what we want to share to our various social channels, that's always informed by velocity. So the stories that have the highest velocity potential are the ones that are getting shared most prominently and on our biggest accounts. If you subscribe to our newsletters, you'll get alerts when things are going to pop according to velocity. So it's really a way for our audience of super sharers to be in before the rest of the web.
And some of this technology to optimize for social, it exists outside of this proprietary platform. So I don't know if it did when you first started, but how are you weighing that decision of build versus buy, and especially as you think about continuing investments into this platform?
Yeah, for us, this was really an area where we saw an opportunity to have significant competitive advantage, particularly given just the DNA of Mashable. We're such a social brand, and so much of our audience is on distributed networks. We really thought it presented an opportunity to have a competitive advantage. I think one of the challenges of using third-party tools for something like that is if everyone's using the same third-party tools, there's not really an advantage anymore. So we thought that was a place where we could win, and I think so far have been proven true. But we don't do that for everything, right? We don't need to recreate the wheel. So for web analytics, just measuring page views or time on site, et cetera, we use standard tools like Google Analytics and Omniture. We don't build our own ad server. There's plenty of good tools out there for that. So for us, the build versus buy is always like thinking about, okay, is this an area where if we build, we think we can really build something that gives us a competitive edge versus all the other publishers out there.
And how are you measuring the ROI on this investment? What are you looking at to make sure the technology is working and that it's worth the investment?
Yeah, a few different ways. I think on the content creation side, so the core editorial usage of Velocity, one of the things we pay the most attention to is efficiency. So about a year ago, we actually made some pretty significant changes in the organization in terms of structure. We actually really felt like we weren't getting as much out of the tools as we wanted, and we thought a lot of that had to do with structure. So we did a few things. We brought the distribution team together with the content team. They used to be separated and siloed. And we also, it was around the same time we rolled out the new CMS functionality. So, one of the huge success metrics for both that as well as some of the recent evolution of the product has been efficiency. So over the last year, we've actually seen that we've cut production by 30% in terms of the amount of content we're producing, but we've actually doubled engagement on Mashable contents, which I think speaks to both the tool, but also how we're using it.
Less content, more results.
Yep.
I like that. And you guys also switched your business up pretty significantly last year, moving from a lot of text to a lot of video. So that's the kind of change where you're like, will this technology still work if we're doing video, or will it help you move faster into this new format? So what was your experience like with that?
Yeah, so I think on the so where velocity is really good on the predictive side is kind of short-term analytics. So it's predicting out kind of 48 hours, which can be challenging in video. Video takes longer to produce, and we actually focus our video primarily on more evergreen content. What we realized in our early attempts at video was that given the resources required to produce it and the expense, we were better off to focus on content that had some shelf life in video. So we actually have moved away from doing kind of quick news video. So velocity in that use case wasn't terribly effective. What we did do is what we have is 5 years worth of data on what people share. So what we were able to do is apply that and actually create an entire new feature within Velocity that we call Insights, which allows us to drill into historically what have been the topics that people have shared the most around in certain areas, and we're able to apply that to thinking about video series, thinking about what type of branded content campaigns we want to create for our advertisers, etc. And as we've actually gotten smarter as an organization, we also are able to find through the Velocity dashboards a lot of inspiration that we're not going to just create a quick turn news video because we saw something in Velocity, but what it often does, now that the teams are working so tightly together in terms of data and content, is it can inspire ideas. One of our most successful video series was actually born out of Velocity. So this is a series we call Scam-A-Lot, which started with one of our editors identifying a blog post that was going to be big. It was written by a comedian in the UK who had a new book out about it's kind of a funny book. It was his premise was he would scam the scammers. So he would get one of these emails saying, wire me $1,000 and I'll send you $1 million of gold bars. But he would actually respond to the scammers and engage with them on a dialogue for like months at a time. And some of the responses were really hilarious. So what we did is we saw that post, we reached out to him for permission to curate some of it on Mashable. That post did really well. It got tens of thousands of page views and social shares. And then we decided to reach out to him and say, hey, would you want to shoot a video with us? So we had, the comedian's name is James Beach. We decided to shoot a video with him. That video got hundreds of thousands of views, signed him up for a series, and each of the 12 videos he's done now with Mashable have more than 1 million views each organically. And he's gone on to become quite successful. He gave a TED Talk that has like 10 million views now, and really without Velocity, we wouldn't have discovered him so quickly.
And yeah, the social platforms that you work on are changing constantly. Facebook is getting bigger. It's changing its algorithms all the time. Now there's Snapchat, Twitter, all these different platforms. How much adaptation do you have to do in order to make sure that this platform is keeping up with the rules that are imposed for what kind of content will go out?
Yeah, there's a couple things, and I think this is where it's really about art and science. I think for us, so Velocity is crawling all the social web, so it's not just focused on one platform. It's basically crawling any data it can get its hands on in terms of social. But one of the important things that's integrated into it is machine learning. So it's constantly evaluating, and the algorithm gets smarter over time based on some of these changes. That said, I think there is a big human creative element. So if Facebook changes, last year it was all about live video. This year it's all about 90-second video with ad breaks. Creatively, we need to adjust our strategy to accommodate for that, and then use the data insights we're getting as we test those new formats to figure out what works best.
And over these 5 years of working with this technology, what are some of the biggest roadblocks or obstacles that you encountered that you would tell someone coming behind you, don't make that mistake, don't, here's how to deal with this roadblock?
Yeah, I think in the early days when we were just getting started, the biggest challenge was finding the right talent. I think, at the time, Mashable was viewed largely as a blog, a technology blog, which I think for engineering talent, data scientists, especially at the time, wasn't considered nearly as sexy as going to work for like Facebook or Snapchat or something like that. So finding the talent initially was, I think, the biggest challenge. And then, the roadblocks beyond that, I would say, have been largely what I was just talking about in terms of really getting the organization, especially the content creators who are key to making it work, to embrace it. And to understand it's not meant to replace them. It's meant to be something that helps them do a better job, helps them be more efficient in how they spend their time. And that took a while and we've gone through several iterations, and I think over the last year and 18 months have really hit our stride in that regard.
And this is primarily a tool that's for editors, but looking at it from the C-suite perspective, how are you guys looking at it? Are there any ways it can provide kind of insights that you wouldn't get anywhere else that you can monitor the business with?
Yeah, I mean, it's primarily a content tool, right? It's primarily about evaluating the web. I think the big area we've integrated it on the business side over the last year and a half has been, it's now core to our ad offering as well. So when it comes to branded content, which has become a much more crowded space since we first got into it, now whenever we're pitching branded content to a client, it always has insights that are driven by velocity, right? So this isn't just a recommendation that we're making because Mashable says it's a good idea, but we also have this rich set of social data that we've been collecting over the 5 years that tells you why we think this idea is going to work for the audience that you're trying to reach with branded content. So from that perspective, it's become a really big piece of our business, and along those lines, we're measuring things that everybody measures in terms of, what's our average deal size, what's our close rate, and how is that accelerated since we started integrating this in our creative process. And the results, since we started doing that about a year and a half ago, have been really good.
Well, it also sounds like you guys can potentially save money on the distribution end, because I know a lot of publishers have budgets just for distribution of content. That's been a huge success story for us with Velocity. We spend next to nothing on paid marketing organically, and then for branded content where the guarantees have gotten more, are always increasing seemingly in terms of what you're expected to deliver. Velocity and our distribution technology, Kilogram, have given us a huge edge there. And Mashable has a lot of organic distribution to begin with, but for executing against ad campaigns, being able to target power users more smartly gives us a huge advantage in cases where we do need to tap into paid budgets. Well, and I feel like a lot of people here probably have very small, highly engaged audiences. Some of the aspects of the tools that you've described are probably great at getting huge scale. But what do you guys do that's kind of more in that engagement realm? Like, can you be like, this velocity story will drive engagement as well as massive scale? Like, what's the balance that you're looking for there?
Yeah, I mean, we have designed it to be able to go pretty narrow as well, both on the prediction side and then also on the distribution side. So on the prediction side, we're able to have dashboards for, our business editor has a different dashboard than our entertainment editor from our science editor. So they're looking at a fairly narrow lens in terms of what are going to be the big topics and stories in their area. And on the distribution side, what we're starting to do as our Kilogram tech gets more robust is be able to not only identify the power users of Mashable, but who are the power users within specific communities. So when we have an advertiser that comes to us and says, I want to reach marketing executives, we actually have a segment of our audience that is marketing executives that are power users that share content that we can then target through, we have it connected to our data management platform, and then we can target those people across the social web.
So what's next for you guys?
Yeah, so I think, with the Velocity suite, continuing to build out the distribution piece, I think that's the piece we're most excited about right now. It's new, and we've seen really encouraging results so far on the branded content part of it. So that's where we're investing a lot of our time and resources. Outside of that, a lot of the focus for us has been on video. So we've grown video more than 500% over the last year. In March, we did north of 350 million video views across platforms, which is really exciting. We're also starting to do more and more video for television. So Turner Broadcasting is one of our investors, and we're working with them on some projects. We also have we're doing digital video work with Nat Geo and Bravo. So that's an exciting new growth area for us, and we have a lot of innovation coming on the technology side that's really geared towards helping us in the video side.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Well, I think we can open it up to questions now if anyone wants to.
Is this thing working? Yeah. So question about, I guess, two factors. You guys have probably had to be very aware and thoughtful about mobile for a long time, since it's a large consumer audience. But I was wondering if, in the platforms, if you've done any recent thinking or seen any recent trends that make you want to do anything around mobile, and or any thinking around bots and how that might play into the platforms and the content strategies that are data informed.
Yeah, I think bots is an area that we haven't done anything yet. I think we probably would, I'd say we view it as another notification platform, and I think Velocity could be a compelling product there. We have experimented in some other areas. I mentioned newsletters. We've also tested some things on other platforms where we're using Velocity alerts kind of as our notification mechanism. We did that we have that on Apple Watch, actually. So I think, if we were to do bots, we'd probably focus on that. And I think, for mobile, Velocity is really it's for the social web, so it doesn't really differentiate between kind of mobile and desktop. It's really crawling everything. I think the new piece that we talk about, Kilogram, and we've just turned this on recently, it's the integration with the data management platform that gives us those targeting capabilities on mobile, which didn't exist before because of some of the challenges in tracking users across mobile devices. So that's kind of a big piece of what we're focused on for the future right now.
Any more questions? Okay. I think that we're good then. Thank you, Adam.
Thanks.